Hi, in this video I'm going to try and walk you through the basics of a titration. Now titrations all have a few things in common. It's always done to neutralize an acid with a base, and one of the acids or bases has a known strength and the other has an unknown strength, and that's what you're attempting to do, is to see how much acid you need to just neutralize all the base, or how much base you need to just neutralize the acid, and then you use M1 times V1 equals M2 times V2 to figure out the unknown strength with your known volumes and the known molarity of one of them. So it really doesn't matter which is the unknown, the acid or the base. The procedure is going to be basically the same. And this piece of equipment here, this burette, and hopefully you can see a look at it, it's kind of a fancy graduated cylinder. And this one, when you look at it, not sure how close you can see it here, but you notice it goes to the nearest tenth, which means you can actually estimate it one place beyond that. So you're going to take your measures to 0.00. So I'm going to go ahead and place it in here where I'll be using it a little later. And this is where I'm going to place one of my substances, either my acid or base. And again, it depends on the procedure you're given as to which you're going to place where. In the case of your lab, you're going to be doing called standardizing a base. It's the base that's got an unknown strength. And you're asked to put 25 milliliters of a known acid into a flask to start things out. So what typically happens is you have another burette. This one has already been filled with the acid we're using, hydrogen phthalate. And if I look up at the top, I can see where the volume is here, and it's a little hard for you to see. So I'm going to use my iPad to help create a little better visual, and then I'm going to look for that meniscus, and when I look, and I have to get on tippy toes, so feel free to do that as well, it appears it's at 0.6, I would say it's pretty much right on 0.60 is the starting volume in there. And that's important to know because I'm being asked to take 25 milliliters out, and I don't have to get exactly 25, I want to get about 25. So I'm going to slide my flask under, and notice that my the tip of my burette extends down into the flask, which is a good thing because then I know all the acid's going to go in there. But it's also a dangerous thing because when you take this off, it's easy to just pull it away and forget the tip is there. So make sure to tip it under, or better yet, go ahead and use the clamp here and move the burette up and down when you're taking it in and out. Either way is fine. But I'm going to go ahead and open the burette here, and actually I should stay in close. Here's the little, what we call the stopcock. Some people reach across, like so, with their right hand to control it. Others control it right from here. It really doesn't matter, and with this one it's pretty simple. I'm just going to open it up to let a stream come out, and you can see the stream going down in there. And I'm going to watch the volume decrease up here, which, again, if you have your iPad, it's a little easier to actually see it. But I'm going to let it run out till I'm down to about 25 milliliters. And then I'm going to go ahead and stop the liquid from dispensing. And then I'll be able to figure out my starting amount of acid. So nothing special, just a clear acid going in there. You will be given the information you need to calculate the strength of this beginning acid. And in a moment here, we'll get our second measurement, and we'll know the volume of our beginning acid. So to shut it off, when it's parallel with the burette, it's fully open, and when I turn it horizontal, it's fully closed, and you see that it quits dispensing. So now I need to take the final volume here. So when I look, I know the focus isn't great on here, but I'm between 24 and 25, and again, taking a look at it, I am at 24.25 is what I'm going to say. So I record this second volume, and now by subtracting my initial and final volume, I will be able to calculate the volume of acid that I'm using. So I've got my acid in my flask, that's all set up. This is actually going to be at the island, or perhaps I'll have one set up for each station, but you're done with the acid burette for now because you've got your sample in the flask. So a couple other things you need in the flask to get going is you need some indicator. We're going to use phenolphthalein. It'll be in a little dropper bottle and measured. And you just need a couple drops. More's not going to influence the change. It's a chemical reaction going on, so you can't trick it. And you might see it get a little cloudy in there for a moment. What you shouldn't see is any pink or purple color, because that would indicate there's a base. And what we should have in there right now is just an acid. The other thing I'm going to do is go ahead and add my magnet. If you didn't notice, we have a magnetic stirrer here, which will help us really more precisely find our end point or the equivalence point for this acid and base neutralization. So I'm going to go ahead and set this over near the magnetic stirrer, and then I have to get my base ready. Now remember, my base is of an unknown value, so I'll have beaker set out with some NaOH in it, with question mark for the molarity. And then you need to go ahead and get your burette ready to use. Now, you have to assume these burettes have been on the shelf. We don't know who used them last or what they used them for. So standard procedure to get your burette ready is to go ahead and take a spray bottle or a rinse bottle. This one says distilled H2O on it. I'm going to make sure my burette clamp is closed. I'm going to go ahead and spray. Let's see if I can get this visible to you. I'm going to spray the rinse bottle down it, and I'm going to twirl it as I do it, being careful that I don't bang the tip of the burette into the counter. These tips are easy to break off. But I'm going to get some fluid in there, and then I'm going to rinse it into my waste beaker. And I'm going to use my waste beaker for a few things. I'm going to go ahead and let that drain in there. My tip was clogged initially there, so I had to unclog it. And if that's the case for you, just let me know and I'll help you out with that. And as I finish, what you may or may not notice is there's a little bit, it's again hard to see here, but there's a little bit of liquid trapped in the bottom there. So that's why we want to rinse it out, is because whatever was used in here last was also trapped in the bottom, so we're trying to rinse it out. We're trying to make sure we have fluid throughout the tip here without any air bubbles. So now we're ready to go ahead and add some NaOH to it. And when we do that, again, we have to make sure we close the stopcock, make sure it's horizontal. I prefer to use a funnel. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the clamp to do this. So I've got the funnel up above here, and I can go ahead and grab my NaOH, my beaker of NaOH, and just go ahead and start pouring it down. And then I want to watch my volume. And I could go ahead and take this up above the zero if I want, because I'm going to have to drain a little bit out. And I don't know if you can see it or not, but I'll pull the funnel out. I can just set that in my beaker with my NaOH and move that aside for now. And when I look at my my burette, I'm actually filled up above the zero line. And that's okay, because now I've got one more step before I start the titration itself. And that is, I want to drain some of this fluid out, some of this base out, to make sure that that stuff that I saw sitting in the bottom, I know I've got some stuff in the bottom that is not NaOH. And unfortunately, it's contaminating the NaOH a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and drain it out, as well as drain the tip out. I'll let a couple milliliters run through, and then I can go ahead and shut it off. And now I have to take my reading, my initial volume of my base, and get this to quit shaking. I am at I'm at 1.18, since I can estimate. And go ahead and record that. I'm going to go ahead and slide my waste beaker out of the way. And now I'm going to go ahead and position my magnetic stirrer. Get my burette positioned above it, try and position it over the center. bring my flask in. Go ahead and drop this down so it's going to drip right in. I'm going to turn the magnetic stir on, which of course it doesn't work. Let me see if I can get that going. There it goes. And now I'm ready to begin the titration. And this first time through, I'm going to do what's called a rough titration. I'm going to get a rough idea of how much acid it takes to completely neutralize this. So I'm going to open up the stopcock so that there's a slight trickle running in. Remember, I've recorded my volume. I'm going to go ahead and let it run in there. Turn this so you can see a little more easily. And eventually I should see some pink starting to develop in there. And actually your instructions also mention if you put a sheet of white paper between the magnetic stir and the flask, it's a little easier to see that pink color. And I'm going to pause here because I think I have a problem with my indicator. So as I continue adding my acid, my base to my acid, I just ran some time there so you don't have to watch the whole thing. Now you see the pink color persisting. And that's what I'm waiting for, is when the pink no longer fades away. So at this point I could back off and add a slightly slower trickle. So if you can get your stopcock adjusted so it's maybe just coming out a drop at a time, and you watch the pink hit and persist. And we're looking to shut it off once the pink stays. And we're looking for just the very faintest of the pinks to persist and stay. And if you're not sure, you can shut it off, and if the pink doesn't stay, you just turn it back on. It's not a big deal. But this is to get a rough estimate of what my volume of acid to base is going to be for this titration. And once I know my rough estimate, then the next time when I run it, when I get within 2 or 3 milliliters of that volume I used, I'm going to slow down to just a drop at a time to be sure that I stop the exact second that my acid and base neutralize each other. Now there it persisted a little bit longer, but I still got the pink coming back here. I think I may finally have reached it. Not quite, but this is what you want. You want it to, you don't want to overshoot that all of a sudden it gets very dark pink and stays dark pink, or you know you've gone beyond what you'd hoped to. And on your rough titration, that's okay, but on your titrations that you're going to use for calculating, you want just the faintest of pinks to persist. And that's pretty good right there. I've got a faint pink. So at this point, I can go ahead and stop adding. I need to look at my burette and get my final volume here. So I'm going to take that reading, calculate the volume of base that was added to the acid. I know the volume of acid I used, and now I can use those to make some calculations. Although again, this was just my rough titration, so I will use this to guide me when I do my actual titrations. And that's the basic setup for a titration.